In this video, I would like to go a little bit more in depth with what you can do with materials, because basically those elements here, those are your building blocks. So let's say, for example, this yellowish material should have a very fine shininess to it, so slightly reflective, but mainly more matte. The problem with just glossy is just plain reflective, and you can change the strength of the reflection or the clearness of the reflection. But sometimes that's not really enough play. So what I'm going to introduce you to now is the node editor. So you see I sliced my viewport into two parts, and then I go to node editor. And let's zoom in a little bit. And let's take a look what we have here. So I have a glossy material and a material output. And you see there's a green dot and a green dot. So think about this as kind of like your output, and this goes into the surface input. And that's then basically what you see here. So if, for example, I select the yellow one, you see now this is diffuse. And you see this color is the same here, the roughness. So you see everything you see here is the same here. So the node editor is basically more like a different graphical representation. So if I, for example, set this one to diffuse, you see everything updates there. Okay, great. So where is this one really useful for? Well, years ago, basically materials were created kind of like in a list approach, like here, and that is actually really okay when you have very basic materials, but the moment they get a little bit more complicated, they're very cumbersome to get or to maintain a really good overview. So what I now would like to do is to add a little bit of shininess to this yellowish material. And to do this, in here, like in 3D view, I press Shift A. But then instead of having cubes and mesh options, I have material options. And for example, I would like you to go to shader and say add glossy. And then you can move this one to there. Now to move parts around, you can click and drag, or you can shift click multiples and then press G to grab. You can even press S to scale. Of course, yeah, oh yeah, you can even rotate. So all the commands from GRS are the same inside the node editor. But now the problem is, well, okay, we have two different materials, and you can see I can drag those noodles or those connectors into different inputs and outputs. And whenever you're really confused about those different inputs and outputs, always think about colors: green to green, yellow to yellow, gray to gray, blue to blue. And what the recipe means, I will get into detail later this semester. Right now we start very basic. So I need something where I could mix those two materials together, because you see I only can logically have one material be working. So what I need is Shift A, a mix shader. Then I put it to here. And you can see I have two green inputs and one green output. So this one, for example, I can plug in here. This one I can plug in there. And then this one I can put to there. And let's take a look. And there you can see now that the result actually is different. And what's happening is this node is basically saying 50% of this material plus 50% of this material, and then the output is being put onto my surface. I have a slider here. I can, for example, move it left and right. And you see now, if this is 1, it uses 100% of my glossy. If this is 0, it uses 100% of my diffuse. So this way I can kind of like mix between different materials. And here you see now, this way I have 90% of my diffuse material with like a little bit of shininess on it. And maybe this one I can increase. So the reflection is really, really diffused or broken. But you see, just with a value of 0.1, it adds a little bit of shininess on it. Just very, very soft. And if I set this to 0, you can see where the highlights would be. And those highlights actually generated by the lights. So for example, see if I put my lights to there, or here, this basically then the position of the lights affects the position of those light reflections on my metallic or reflective surface, of course. And by increasing the roughness, I make everything very blurred. I could, for example, I don't know, maybe goof around with this a little bit. Let's say I add another mix shader here, and then add another glossy material here, and say this piece should be reflective as well. So now I added a really small amount of reflection value to this plastic. Maybe the reflection is still too strong. Maybe this is too clear. And of course, this is a this is a white material. Seeing a white reflection on the white material is not really giving you a lot of information. But what happens if maybe I make this one red? There you see, for example, the red reflection on it. See, so it's actually really there. And if we make this one reddish, there you see now this red, the white reflection a little bit better. And you see by, again, like what I did with the yellow one, by increasing the roughness, I break up the strength of the highlight, stretch it more over the surface, and give you more the feeling of kind of like a surface that is reflective, but got, like with super fine sandpaper, slightly roughened up. And if I don't want this, I can just click delete, so X key, and maybe set this back to just this white color. Now the metallic part, for example, I would like to turn it to chrome. So 2 ways how I can do this. This one, for example, I decide, hey, you should be glossy because you're reflective. And maybe a slight reflection to it. And that's basically it now. So there's not much more I really have to add to it. And maybe this gray part here I would like to be reflective. So shader, glossy, 0.5, mix material or mix shader. There, and maybe the reflection is too strong, so I change the color, tone it down. So I make the reflection not to stick out too much. Okay, great. So let's keep it at the moment at this level. And there's actually a lot more to it. The last thing maybe I would like to show you, if you would like to play with it. If you think about a window, and if you are straight or perpendicular looking at the window, for example, you can see through the glass. But if you stay next to the window, look at the surface, so you're more tangent looking at the window, you can see a reflection of the environment on the window. And this physical effect a French person called Fresnel actually discovered. And this basically decides, like, based on your angle looking at the surface, you can change the way how kind of like a property of a surface changes. So let's be a little bit more experimental. Let's say we have, for example, I don't know, maybe let's select this blue. Okay, so I have my white material here selected. I add a mix shader, plug this one in, and there you can see this result is kind of like mixing between this strong blue and this white. But I would like the software to show me the blue only along the rim, so where I look tangent at the surface, and show me the white where I look perpendicular onto the surface. And for this, I can go to Input and, for example, use Fresnel. And you see now there is something called factor, and this factor is gray, and I can plug it into the factor here. And for example, there, you can see that there's a really small, shiny bluish outline. And also here, it's a much stronger. And actually, I have the feeling that my surfaces here are inverted. Let me see. Yep, they are. So I have to flip them. And I have the feeling the same is true up here. Yeah, as well, outside. Okay. So let's go back to the white material. So you see that there is a really small, tiny bluish outline on my part. And now with this value of index of reflection, I can, for example, decide how far, for example, you see blue or you see white and how it transits. And instead of being diffused, maybe I can use a glossy material. And maybe let's make this one really black. So for example, this way, you can see that I decided to make my surface only at the rim to be reflective, but not necessarily on the front parts. And if I increase this number, then you see the reflection gets much stronger. You can see now how white this all is. And if I set this one to 1, you don't see it. 1.1, it's a little bit visible, but it's toned down, so the strength of the reflection is different. So, and that's basically what you can do with Fresnel. It helps you to add kind of like to affect how strong something is reflective when you see it at a gazing angle, so tangent or, for example, perpendicular. And maybe let's put this one back to there. And maybe this reflection I make slightly bluish or yellowish, because there's also not really like a true white. Okay, I would say let's leave it at this for the moment.